The day I realized my son had drained every dollar from my account, I didn't cry. I just stared at the glowing numbers on my phone screen that read, balance $0, 0 cents, as if the device had made a mistake it would soon correct. But it didn't. It stayed there. Cold, final, merciless. My name is Margaret Cole, and that was the moment my heart stopped belonging to my son. I sat on my old floral armchair, the one I'd bought years ago when Daniel turned 7, using my first honest paycheck from cleaning houses in the upper part of Los Angeles. The chair creaked under me, just like my bones did these days, but it was the only thing that had stayed loyal all these years. My hands trembled as I scrolled through the statement again and again. Every transaction blurred together into a nightmare of wire transfers and withdrawals. $80,000. My life's savings. Gone. At first, I thought maybe the bank made a mistake. I called, waited through the endless beeps, the robot voice, the hold music that sounded like a lullaby meant to calm people right before bad news. When a real person finally answered, her voice was polite but distant. "The transfers were made online, ma'am," she said, "to an account under the name of Daniel Cole." My son's name echoed in my ears. I almost dropped the phone. "Do you want to file a fraud report?" the woman asked. I couldn't speak. I just hung up. Silence took over the house, the kind that screams louder than noise ever could. The clock in the kitchen ticked too loud, and the flickering light buzzed above me. Outside, an ice cream truck passed by. Its tune, cheerful and cruel. The world was still spinning, but mine had stopped. Then came the landline, an old phone I kept only out of habit. I lifted it with a hand that felt made of stone. "Margaret, oh honey, have you seen Daniel's Instagram?" It was Mrs. Green, my neighbor of 30 years, her voice a mix of gossip and disbelief. "He's in Rome, dear, with that pretty wife of his and her mother. You should see the photos. They're eating caviar and drinking wine like movie stars." Rome. I felt something heavy drop inside my chest. I thanked her softly, hung up, and stared at the floor for a long time. Then I walked to my dresser and pulled out my old smartphone. I wasn't one for social media, but Daniel had once set up an account for me saying, "Just so you can keep up, Mom." I searched his profile. It didn't take long to find what Mrs. Green was talking about. There he was, my Daniel, standing in front of the Coliseum, holding a glass of champagne, wearing a white shirt that looked brand new. Beside him, his wife, Sophie, smiled with that polished charm that never reached her eyes. And beside her stood Carla, Sophie's mother, her arm looped proudly around them both. The caption read, "Rome, my new beginning. I deserve this." And underneath it, Sophie had commented, "Thanks for everything, Mom. Couldn't have done it without you." I didn't scream. I didn't break the phone. I didn't even blink. I just stood there with the screen glowing against my palm, burning through my skin. I felt like every heartbeat was a hammer against my ribs. Then, slowly, I smiled. Not the kind of smile that means happiness, but the kind that means something inside you has finally died and left room for something else. I didn't know what that something else was yet, but I could feel it growing. Miles away, under the Roman sky, I imagined Daniel raising his glass again, laughing with Sophie and her mother. Maybe they were talking about me, maybe they weren't, but I could picture it. The clinking glasses, the careless laughter, the way Sophie might whisper something cruel between sips of expensive wine. She always had a way of turning words into knives. "She's old," she'd probably said. "Better we use it before she wastes it on hospital bills." And Carla would laugh that dry laugh of hers, the kind that makes your skin crawl. Poor woman, probably doesn't even know how to log into her bank account. And Daniel, my son, would sit there pretending not to hear, pretending not to know what they had done. That night, my little house in South Los Angeles felt emptier than it ever had. The air was heavy, like grief had a weight you could actually carry. On the shelf, I had photos of Daniel, his first school uniform, his awkward teenage smile, the day he graduated. Everything in that room was a monument to him. I gave him my youth, my strength, my future. I sold my wedding ring to buy him a computer for college. I gave him the small plot of land my parents left me so he could pay tuition. And in return, he gave me silence. I remembered the last time I tried to visit him. It was just a week before all this happened. I'd cooked his favorite, fried chicken and mashed potatoes, and carried it across town in a container still warm. But when I reached his apartment, the doorman stopped me. He said, "Sorry, ma'am, Mr. Cole instructed that you can't come up without notice." I stood there in the hot sun for 2 hours, clutching that tray, hoping maybe he'd come down anyway. He didn't. That day, I walked home instead of taking the bus. I needed the wind, even if it was hot and full of dust. Each step felt heavier than the last. But I kept going because stopping would mean falling apart right there on the sidewalk. Later that evening, Mrs. Green came by with coffee and a slice of pecan pie. She tried to comfort me. "He's young, Margaret. Maybe he'll realize what he's done." I looked at her, my eyes tired but dry. "Do you think children ever truly regret, Doris?" She hesitated. "When their mother's gone, yes, they realize then." I smiled faintly. "Then I hope it's not too late." Mrs. Green frowned, unsure how to respond. "And what will you do now?" I stirred my coffee slowly. "I'll smile, like they taught me to." She tilted her head. "Smile? After this?" "Yes," I said quietly, "because I've cried enough. And when a woman has nothing left to lose, she becomes dangerous." That night, the world felt still. I sat by the window watching the orange glow of streetlights spill over the cracked pavement. I made myself a cup of chamomile tea, the same kind I used to make when Daniel was little and couldn't sleep. Only now, I was the one who couldn't rest. I opened my old recipe notebook, the one full of chicken scratch handwriting and half-finished ideas, and turned to a blank page. My hands shook as I wrote, "This is not the end. It's the beginning of my silence, and my silence will hurt more than any scream." I closed the notebook, set it beside the teacup, and leaned back in the chair. For the first time in years, I slept without tears. Somewhere across the ocean, in a hotel suite that smelled of perfume and deceit, Daniel was just beginning to understand what silence can do. Because silence, when held long enough, becomes power. And mine had just begun.
The morning after I discovered what my son had done, I woke up before dawn. The street outside was quiet, still wet from a night of drizzle. I stood in the kitchen, waiting for the kettle to whistle, watching the blue flame of the gas stove flicker under the pot. For a long time, I just stared at that flame. It reminded me of all the mornings I'd woken up like this before, not because I wanted to, but because life demanded it. Something strange stirred inside me that morning. It wasn't anger, and it wasn't sadness either. It was something steadier, sharper, determination maybe. The kind that comes when you've lost everything and realize you're still standing. The sound of the boiling water took me back decades, to the first time I understood what it meant to be truly alone. I was 14 when I started cleaning houses in the fancy parts of Los Angeles. Back then, my hands were small, but already cracked from soap and bleach. I catch the early bus before sunrise, my stomach empty, but my heart full of dreams I couldn't even name. The women I worked for wore silk robes and spoke in voices so soft you had to lean in to hear them. They'd leave lipstick stains on their teacups and forget my name even after months. To them, I was invisible. By the time I was 17, life had already written a story for me I didn't ask to star in. I met a boy named Frank, tall, kind, and full of promises that sounded like rescue. When I found out I was pregnant, he held my hands and said, "Don't worry, Maggie, we'll make it." But when he learned it was a boy, He disappeared. No goodbye, no explanation, just gone. The night I realized he wasn't coming back, I sat on the front steps of my mother's small house, feeling the air heavy with the smell of dust and rain. My mother was already asleep. She'd long stopped waiting for men to do right by us. I remember whispering to my swollen belly, "It's okay, baby. I'll be both." That baby was Daniel. When he was born, the nurse said, "You're just a kid yourself." And I said, "Then I'll grow up fast." And I did. I grew up faster than anyone should have to. Those early years were a blur of exhaustion and love. I strapped him to my back while I scrubbed other people's floors. When he got old enough to walk, I gave him detergent caps to play with, pretend cars for a boy who didn't have real ones. We didn't have much, but we had music. I'd hum while I cleaned, and he'd dance with the rhythm of a child who didn't yet know what poverty meant. Sometimes, when he fell asleep, I'd sit by the window and imagine a better life for him, one where his hands didn't smell like bleach, one where he never had to beg for kindness. When he was 6, one of my clients, Mrs. Langford, a rich widow with a soft spot for stories, offered to pay for Daniel's tuition at a private elementary school. In exchange, I had to live in her guest house and work full-time. I said yes without thinking twice. That tiny rooftop room became my world. I'd wake up at 4 to clean her marble kitchen, polish her brass fixtures, and make sure the garden was watered before sunrise. Then every weekend, I'd take the bus across town to see Daniel. I'd always bring something, a new notebook, a toy car from a thrift store, or just a jar of jam I'd managed to save up for. He'd run into my arms yelling, "Mama!" And for a moment, I'd forget I was tired. Those weekends were my everything. The only reason I could keep breathing through weeks of silence and hard labor was knowing I'd hear his laughter again soon. Years passed. Daniel grew into a tall, bright boy with a smile that could melt anyone's heart. He was sharp, ambitious, and polite, the kind of child teachers remembered. I couldn't afford to buy him fancy clothes, but I made sure he always looked neat. When he got sick, I'd walk 5 miles to the free clinic just to get his medicine. When he turned 16, he told me, "Mom, when I make it big, I'm going to buy you a house where the cold never comes through the walls." I laughed and said, "Don't buy me anything, sweetheart. Just don't forget me." He promised. I believed him. When Daniel was accepted into college, I felt like I'd finally done something right. But the tuition was too high. I sold the small piece of land my father had left me in Georgia. Land I'd always dreamed of retiring on, maybe planting roses there one day. I sold it for less than it was worth, but I didn't care. My son was going to be educated. He was going to escape the life that trapped me. My boy's going to be an accountant, I'd tell my neighbors proudly. He's going to wear a suit and work in an office with air conditioning. And he did, for a while. It was during his second year that he met Sophie. The first time he brought him home, I remember feeling a chill. She was beautiful, yes, but in the way that glass is beautiful, shiny, fragile, and dangerous if it breaks. She looked around my small living room as if she'd stepped into another world she couldn't wait to leave. "This place is, quaint," she said, trying to sound polite. And then her mother, Carla, chimed in with that sugary tone people use when they're being cruel. "Very vintage, isn't it? You must love antiques." I smiled, the same smile I always used when I didn't have the strength to argue. As months went by, Sophie began taking up more and more space in Daniel's life. At first I was glad. He seemed happy. But then she started drawing lines between us. Subtle ones at first. "Your mom needs to rest. She shouldn't come over so often." Then, "Your mom shouldn't interfere with our choices." And eventually, "Your mom doesn't fit in with our friends." Every word built a wall between me and the boy I'd raised with my bare hands. The last time Daniel came to visit unannounced, I cooked them pot roast, the kind he used to love. But he barely touched it. He sat there scrolling on his phone and finally said, "Mom, Sophie thinks you need to give us space. You're too involved in our lives." I smiled sadly. "I just want you to be happy, Daniel." He said, "I am," though his eyes didn't match his voice. After he left, I scraped the cold food into the trash and washed the dishes in silence. The water was hot enough to burn, but I let it. Sometimes you need to feel something real to remind yourself you're still alive. Over the next months, I saw him less and less. Sophie managed his life like she was rewriting it. His finances, his decisions, even his thoughts, she touched everything. And he let her. One Sunday, I decided to surprise them. I baked banana bread and brought it over. But when I knocked, no one opened the door. I heard laughter from inside, the kind that made you feel small. I left the bread at the doorstep. It was gone the next day, but no one called to thank me. That night, I sat by my window again, the city lights blinking in the distance. I didn't cry. I just whispered to myself, he's not lost. He's borrowed by the wrong people. But deep down, I knew I'd already started losing him long before the money disappeared. And sometimes, when love turns to blindness, betrayal doesn't shock you. It just confirms what your soul already knew.
The day I realized Daniel's betrayal went deeper than money was the day I stopped being the mother he used to know. I wasn't just heartbroken anymore. I was awake. It started with little things. A letter that never arrived, a bill I didn't recognize, a bank statement that seemed shorter than it should be. At first, I told myself it was a mistake. Then one afternoon, while cleaning my drawers, I found a document tucked under some old photos, something I didn't remember signing. It looked official, full of legal terms I barely understood, but I saw my name printed neatly at the top, followed by a signature that looked like mine, except it wasn't. My stomach twisted. That night, I went to see Harold, an old friend from my neighborhood, a retired lawyer who used to help folks like me with tenant disputes and small claims. His apartment smelled of dust and paper, the kind of place where memories and old case files blended together. "Harold," I said, sliding the paper toward him, "can you tell me what this means?" He put on his glasses and squinted at the document. "Where did you get this?" "In a pile of mail. It looks like something about a joint account, but I've never signed anything like that." He read in silence for a moment, then exhaled through his nose. "Margaret, this is serious. This paper lists you as a guarantor for an account connected to Daniel's name. You didn't sign this, did you?" "I can barely write my name properly, Harold. Whoever did this, it wasn't me." He nodded slowly. "Then your signature's been forged. And from the look of these records, they've been withdrawing small amounts for months. Whoever's doing this knows exactly what they're doing." I felt the air leave my lungs. "He's my son," I whispered, my voice breaking. He didn't answer right away. He just looked at me with the kind of pity that hurts more than judgment. "I'll help you," he said finally. "But you have to prepare yourself, Maggie. This might not just be him. There could be others involved." I nodded, even though part of me wanted to cover my ears and pretend I hadn't heard. I left his apartment and walked home through the city's noise, feeling both smaller and sharper at the same time. By the time I reached my front steps, I had decided I would not collapse again. I would not be the helpless woman crying over a son who chose greed over love. That night, I wrote in my red notebook, "He took what I earned with my hands, but he won't take my dignity. I will not shout. I will not plead. I will wait." Meanwhile, miles away in a Rome hotel suite, my son was living like a prince, or at least pretending to. The photos kept coming. Posts of luxury dinners, brand new clothes, golden sunsets captioned with hollow words about manifesting blessings. I could almost hear Sophie's laughter between those filtered smiles. But not everything was as perfect as it looked. Harold called me 2 weeks later. He said, "I've gone through the transactions. There's more than we thought. Someone's been transferring large sums directly to Daniel's name. He's not just spending your money. He's laundering it through accounts you never approved." I pressed the phone closer to my ear. "Can we prove it?" "Eventually, but we'll need evidence. Bank logs, digital trails, copies of statements. If you still have access to your online banking, we can track them down." I don't even know how to log in. She chuckled softly. Then let's get you someone who does. That's how Linda entered my life, a retired accountant from down the street. She was the kind of woman who wore reading glasses on a chain and believed every problem could be solved with a spreadsheet. When I showed her my phone and told her what was happening, she looked me straight in the eyes. Your son? She asked softly. Yes. She pursed her lips, nodded once, and said, Then we'll catch him the right way. For several nights, she sat at my dining table showing me how to read online statements. I watched her fingers fly over the screen, pulling up pages of transactions that made my stomach churn. Line after line, my money had been bleeding out. $500 here, $1,200 there, $4,000 on one particularly bold day. Each one had Daniel's name stamped beside it. Linda's eyes hardened. See this pattern? It's deliberate. And look here. Someone forged your name to open a secondary account. That signature's a copy. They didn't even bother hiding it. I pressed my hand against my chest. How can a child do this to his own mother? She didn't answer, just placed her hand over mine and said, Sometimes love blinds us to what people become when they forget gratitude. That night, I couldn't sleep. The house felt haunted, not by ghosts, but by memories. Every photo, every sound, every object whispered, he did this. I sat in the dark and thought of all the times I'd protected Daniel, when I'd gone hungry so he could eat, when I'd lied to debt collectors just to keep our lights on. I thought of how proud I was to see him graduate, how much I'd prayed that education would make him better than the world that hurt me. I had been wrong. And yet, even with that truth tearing me apart, I didn't hate him. Not yet. I waited. I watched. I wrote down every single transaction in my notebook. Date, time, amount. I made columns of betrayal, each line a quiet scream. Then one Friday night, while Linda was helping me print records, she said, You're calm, too calm. What are you planning? I smiled faintly. Nothing, not yet. Because I knew something she didn't. Silence was my sharpest weapon. Across the ocean, Daniel was beginning to feel the weight of his choices. He had everything he thought he wanted, the luxury hotel, the designer suits, the validation of strangers. But Sophie had changed. She didn't kiss him like before. She spent long hours on the balcony whispering into her phone in another language, laughing in a way that sounded rehearsed. One night, while he thought he was asleep, he heard her voice through the balcony door. Yes, it's done. The money's here. Tomorrow we move it to Spain. Then we're done with him. He's just a means to an end. Daniel froze. The glass of water in his hand trembled. His wife was plotting to abandon him. And worse, she wasn't even hiding it. He lay back in bed, staring at the ceiling, realizing too late that the same coldness he'd shown me had come back to visit him. Back in Los Angeles, I could feel it. Some invisible thread tightening between us. Maybe it was intuition. Maybe it was God. I didn't know, but I woke up in the middle of the night with a calm certainty that his world was about to collapse. I went to my kitchen, brewed chamomile tea, and opened my red notebook again. On the blank page, I wrote, He thinks he's the thief, but what he took was never money. It was the illusion that I needed him to survive. Then, just before dawn, I called Harold. I said, It's time. He said, Time for what? I said, For me to stop waiting for justice and start building it. And though he didn't understand what I meant, he said quietly, Then let's begin. I hung up and looked out the window at the first light creeping over the rooftops. For years, I had lived for my son. Now, for the first time in my life, I was living for myself. And if it meant walking through fire to reclaim my dignity, then so be it.
The morning I found out I was dying, I didn't cry. I didn't even blink. I just sat there in the stiff leather chair of Dr. Patel's office, clutching my purse like it could hold my soul together. He spoke softly, the way doctors do when they're about to hand you a death sentence wrapped in kindness. Margaret, he said, adjusting his glasses. The test results show an advanced stage of leukemia. It's moving quickly. I wish I had better news. His words hung in the air like smoke, visible, heavy, impossible to breathe through. How long? I asked. He hesitated. If the treatment doesn't take, maybe 6 months? I looked down at my hands, old, wrinkled, but steady. 6 months, I repeated quietly. That's enough. He blinked. Enough for what? For what I have left to do. He started to explain chemotherapy, side effects, costs, possibilities. I listened politely, then interrupted. Will it save me? He didn't answer. His silence was the answer. Then no, I said. I don't want to die in a gown surrounded by machines. I spent my life cleaning other people's messes. I won't die as one. When I left the clinic, the sunlight felt strange on my skin, too warm for such cold news. The world kept moving, people rushed around me, cars honked, life refused to pause. But I walked slowly, taking in every sound, every color. The sky looked too blue, the air too alive, and I thought, maybe that's what dying really does. It teaches you how to notice. As I passed the corner store, Mr. Ruiz, the old grocer, waved at me. You okay, Miss Margaret? You look like you've seen a ghost. I smiled faintly. I have. My own. When I got home, I didn't fall apart. I made tea. I lit the little candle I kept by the window, and then I took out my red notebook. On a new page, I wrote, I've been given an expiration date, but before I go, I'll make sure my story doesn't end in pity. Justice isn't about revenge, it's about peace. That night, I opened the small wooden box I had kept under my bed for years. Inside were scraps of my life, receipts, clippings, and a photo of Daniel as a little boy asleep with his hand wrapped around my finger. I held that photo against my chest until I could no longer tell if the ache in my heart was grief or strength. By morning, my plan had formed completely. The first thing I did was meet Harold. He'd been waiting for my call, though he didn't expect what I told him. I want to file a complaint. I walked into his cluttered living room. Against Daniel? Yes, I replied, steady as stone. Are you sure? This will drag him through the system, freeze his accounts, maybe even blacklist him. It won't be pretty. Neither was what he did, I said. I raised a son, Harold, but now I have to face the man he became. If the law is the only thing that can make him stop, then that's what I'll use. So we filed everything. The forged documents, the unauthorized transactions, and the proof of elder financial abuse. Harold knew all the right words to write on the forms, the ones that made the system listen. And with his help, I requested a temporary account freeze under the clause meant to protect vulnerable seniors. It wasn't revenge, it was justice. Slow, quiet, lawful. After that, I walked into a stationery shop and bought a new notebook, bound in red leather. On the first page, I wrote a letter addressed to Daniel. To my son, you were born from pain, and I raised you with love. I gave you everything, my youth, my sleep, my years. You took my trust, and that I cannot replace. What I do now isn't cruelty, it's consequence. You mistook silence for weakness, but silence, my dear, is only patience dressed in grief. I forgive you, but I will not save you. When I finished, I pressed a small heart at the bottom of the page, not drawn perfectly, just enough to remind him that I was still his mother. Meanwhile, across the sea, Daniel's perfect world was beginning to crack. He didn't know it yet, but the freeze I'd requested had already taken effect. The first blow came when his credit card was declined at a fancy restaurant. He laughed awkwardly, assuming it was a glitch. Then it happened again,
and again. Sophie's patience thinned quickly. "What's going on, Daniel?" she snapped, her perfect smile replaced with venom. I, I don't know. Maybe the bank." "The bank?" she cut in. "You took her money, didn't you? That pathetic woman's money." He flinched. "She's my mother." "Not anymore, she's not," she hissed. "And now you've dragged me into your mess." Later that night, while pretending to scroll through his phone, Daniel overheard Sophie on a call with her mother, Carla. "It's over, Mom. The accounts are frozen. We'll move the rest tomorrow. Then we vanish. He'll never find us." Daniel felt the floor vanish beneath his feet. Betrayal has a sound. It's the silence after someone finishes using you. And as Sophie planned her escape, I was tying the last knots of mine. For weeks, Harold helped me contact agencies, file additional reports, and gather evidence. Then one day, he looked at me with a hint of worry. "You're running out of time, Maggie. You look pale." I smiled. "I'm running on purpose, not time." In the evenings, when the pain in my bones got worse, I'd sit on the porch, wrapped in a blanket, writing small notes in the red notebook. Not about anger, but about clarity. I wrote about forgiveness, about what I wanted him to learn once the storm came. I wanted him to know what it feels like to lose everything, not out of spite, but because some lessons only pain can teach. And soon, he would learn. The next week, I received confirmation from Harold that the international alert had gone through. Any financial movement tied to Daniel Cole's name would trigger a review. The moment he returned to U.S. soil, he'd have to face the authorities. I closed my eyes and exhaled. It was done. That evening, I brewed one last cup of chamomile tea and sat by the window, the sky darkening into a velvet blue. I wasn't afraid anymore. I felt light, almost free. I thought of Daniel as a boy, his messy curls, his tiny shoes by the door, his giggles echoing through the house, and I whispered softly, "May this hurt enough to heal you." Before going to bed, I opened my notebook and wrote one final line for the night. Sometimes a mother's love must burn to become light. The next morning, Daniel woke up in Rome to chaos. His phone buzzed nonstop, emails from the bank, frozen accounts, canceled cards, and one chilling message: pending investigation for fraudulent use of elder assets. He sat on the edge of the bed staring blankly at the screen. Sophie stood at the window, already packing her bags. "You're on your own now," she said coldly. "I don't stay with failures." She slammed the door behind her. Daniel didn't know it yet, but every door he'd closed on me was about to open again. This time, not for comfort, but for reckoning. And miles away, sitting in my little house with the scent of tea in the air, I smiled, not from satisfaction, but from peace. Because I had finally understood something the hard way. Revenge can destroy you, but justice, quiet, patient justice, can set you free. When everything finally collapsed for Daniel, it happened fast, like a bridge giving way beneath him. It began with a declined card at a restaurant in the heart of Rome. Then his hotel bill was rejected, his flight tickets canceled, and his phone began buzzing with alerts he didn't understand. "Your account has been temporarily frozen due to suspicious activity." Each message hit like a punch to the chest. Sophie's face turned pale the moment she read the notifications. "What did you do?" she snapped. "I don't know," Daniel stammered. "It must be a mistake." But Sophie wasn't listening. She paced the floor like a caged animal, her phone pressed to her ear. "Mom, the money's locked, every penny." "No, I don't care whose name's on it. It's his mess. We're not going down for this." Daniel reached for her arm. "Sophie, wait." She jerked away. "Don't touch me. You think I'm going to sit here and rot with you? You're finished, Daniel. Do you understand? Finished." And just like that, she walked out. For the first time in years, Daniel found himself alone. The silence of that hotel room felt suffocating. He sat on the bed, head in his hands, staring at the phone screen that refused to light up with any trace of mercy. Across the ocean, I was sitting at my kitchen table when the phone rang. It was Harold. He said, "It worked. The accounts are frozen. The embassy's been notified. He'll be flagged the moment he tries to leave Italy." I nodded slowly, my tea untouched beside me. "Thank you, Harold." "You know," he said softly, "I've seen people chase revenge my whole life, but I've never seen anyone do it with so much grace." "This isn't revenge," I whispered. "This is me teaching him the meaning of consequences." That night, I wrote in my red notebook, "He will cry not because I broke him, but because he broke himself." Over the next days, the situation overseas worsened. Daniel couldn't withdraw a single euro. Every attempt triggered another alert. The Italian bank officials looked at him with suspicion. Then, one morning, he received an email from the American embassy in Rome. "Mr. Daniel Cole, you are required to appear before the consular office to address an active investigation concerning financial misconduct involving an elderly U.S. citizen. Failure to comply may result in legal action." He felt sick. He knew exactly which elderly citizen they meant. When he finally called me, it was past midnight. I was sorting through my medicine bottles, counting the days I had left. The phone rang once, twice, and something inside me whispered, "Answer. It's time." "Mom." His voice cracked through the line like a child again. "Yes." "What did you do?" "They froze everything. I don't even have a ticket home. Sophie's gone, her mother too. They left me. They said you did this." I paused, staring at the wall where Daniel's childhood drawings still hung in fading frames. "I didn't take anything from you, Daniel. I only stopped what you were taking from me. You said you'd always be there for me." "I was, until you stopped being there for yourself." "Mom, please, they're going to arrest me. Help me." I closed my eyes. My hand trembled, but my voice didn't. "Then learn, my son. Learn what it feels like when everything you used to stand on disappears. Maybe then you'll understand what you did to me." I hung up, not in anger, but in peace. The next morning, I woke up lighter. For the first time since the diagnosis, I felt no fear of dying, because I knew something had finally shifted. The scales had balanced. Meanwhile, Daniel walked the cobblestone streets of Rome, a stranger among tourists. His clothes were wrinkled, his shoes dusty. He slept in hostels, ate whatever scraps he could afford. Every night he replayed my voice in his head, "Learn." It echoed louder than any insult Sophie ever threw at him. When his meeting day came, he entered the embassy shaking. The white walls were too bright, too clean. He sat on a metal chair under flickering fluorescent lights, his hands clasped together like a man waiting for judgment. The consular officer entered with a folder and said, "You're here to clarify your involvement in the financial case of Mrs. Margaret Cole." He swallowed hard. "She's my mother." The officer nodded. "She has filed claims of forgery, elder financial abuse, and fraudulent transfers under your name. However, there's also a letter attached, a personal statement that changes things. You will not be arrested, but you will sign documents renouncing access to her assets and accounts. You'll also be under financial observation for 5 years. Daniel nodded mutely, tears threatening to spill. May I speak to her?" The officer hesitated. "She's here." He looked up stunned. "What?" And that's when I entered. I wore a simple gray sweater, my hair hidden beneath a scarf. My body was frail, but I stood tall. The sound of my shoes against the tile echoed through the room. When our eyes met, his filled instantly with tears. "Mom," he whispered, his voice breaking. I nodded once. "I came to witness, not to comfort." He looked smaller than I remembered. The arrogance, the distance, all of it had drained out of him. "Please," he said, "I don't know how I got here." I placed an envelope on the table. "This is for you." He looked confused. "What is it?" "Your childhood," I said. "Photos, letters, proof that there was once a version of you who loved without taking." He opened the envelope with shaking hands. Out spilled faded photographs, a boy holding a toy car, a letter to Santa written in crooked handwriting, a picture of us on the porch of our first apartment. And then he saw it. The final letter I'd written in my red notebook. "My dearest Daniel, I raised you to stand tall, not to step on others. I gave you everything I had, not so you could take more, but so you'd know enough to give. You let the wrong people teach you love as a transaction. I can't fix that for you, but I can make you face it. I don't hate you. I never could, but I will no longer protect you from the pain that teaches what love never could. Mom." Daniel broke down. He tried to speak, but his voice collapsed into sobs. He whispered, "I ruined everything." I stood in front of him, tears threatening but restrained. "No, you lost everything. And sometimes that's the only way to start over." The officer cleared his throat softly. "Mr. Cole, we need your signature." Daniel signed. His hand shook the entire time. Before leaving, I looked at him one last time. "You'll carry this moment longer than any punishment they could give you. That's how you'll remember me." He nodded, unable to meet my eyes. When I stepped out of the embassy, the Roman air felt heavy but cleansing. Harold was waiting outside the gate. "Did it go as planned?" he asked. "Yes," I said, tightening my scarf. "Do you feel better?" I smiled faintly. "No, but I feel finished." That night, videos of our encounter circulated online. Someone had recorded the moment I handed Daniel the envelope. The comments flooded in from strangers around the world. That's real strength. A mother's justice is the hardest kind, but I didn't read them. I wasn't interested in being admired. I just wanted peace. The next day, I boarded my flight back home, my body weak, but my heart strangely calm. From the window, I looked out at the fading lights of Rome and whispered, "Goodbye, my son." It wasn't bitterness. It was release. And as the plane lifted off, I felt like I was finally leaving behind not just a city, but the version of myself that had waited too long to be respected. When I returned home, the world felt quieter, like everything had been waiting for me to finally stop fighting. The air was thick with the smell of rain-soaked earth, and the trees in my small yard had begun shedding their leaves. Every golden leaf that drifted to the ground felt like a silent clock tick, marking the time I had left. My body had grown weaker. Some mornings, I couldn't even button my blouse without my hands trembling. But I didn't complain. I had made peace with my fate. The doctor's pill sat untouched by the bedside. I didn't want to waste what little time I had feeling half alive. Instead, I began to write. Each day I sat by the window with a blanket over my knees and filled page after page in my red notebook, not just about the betrayal or the pain, but about love, motherhood, forgiveness, and the small beauty that still lived in ordinary days. I wrote as if my words might outlive me, as if Daniel might one day find them and understand the woman behind the quiet strength. One evening, Mrs. Green, my neighbor, knocked on my door carrying a small pot of soup. "You haven't been out much, Maggie," she said kindly. "Are you all right?" I smiled faintly. "Just tired, but thank you." She glanced at me, worry written all over her face. "You've lost weight. Have you heard from your boy?" "Not yet, but I will, because deep down, I knew that broken sons always find their way back, not because they want forgiveness, but because guilt has a louder voice than pride. And I was right. 3 weeks later, I received a letter from him. It wasn't fancy or long, just a plain white envelope with handwriting that trembled between shame and desperation. Mom, I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't even forgive myself. I've been working at a shelter here in Rome while waiting for clearance to return home. I wanted to run, but I remembered your voice that day, the calm one, the one that didn't curse me. I think that voice saved me. I want to see you. I want to make things right. Daniel. I stared at the letter for a long time. My chest felt heavy, not from pain, but from the weight of a truth I wasn't sure how to hold. My son was finally learning. 2 weeks later, he arrived. I heard his footsteps before I saw him, the hesitant shuffle of someone walking back into a place they once called home, but no longer felt they deserved. I opened the door, and there he was. He looked nothing like the man who'd left. His face was thin, eyes sunken, hair grown out. He carried a small duffel bag and a face full of regret. "Hi, Mom," he whispered. I didn't move for a moment. Then I said softly, "You found your way back." He nodded. I didn't deserve to, but yes. When he stepped inside, he hesitated like a guest afraid to sit without permission. He looked around the house as though it were sacred ground. "You kept everything the same," he said quietly, eyes landing on the framed photo of him as a boy. "I didn't have the heart to change it," I replied. For a while, neither of us spoke. The silence was heavy, but not sharp anymore. It felt like soil after a storm, messy, damp, but ready for something new to grow. Then he finally broke down. "Mom, I'm so sorry for everything, for the money, for the lies, for walking away. I thought success meant leaving behind the people who made me, but I see now that without you, I was nothing." I placed my hand over his. "You were lost, Daniel, but you weren't gone." He shook his head. "I ruined you." "No," I said gently. "You ruined the idea I had of you, but the boy I loved is still somewhere inside. That's the one that came back to me." Tears filled his eyes, spilling freely. "I don't know how to make it right." "Then don't try to erase it," I whispered. "Just start from where you are."
He stayed with me after that. For the first time in years, the house was full again, not of laughter, but of quiet company. We cooked simple meals together. Sometimes he'd sit beside me as I wrote, and other times he'd read aloud the old notes I'd scribbled in my red notebook. He found the page where I'd written, "Sometimes a mother's love must burn to become light." He looked up, eyes glistening. "You wrote this about me, didn't you?" I smiled faintly. Every word. After that, something changed between us. He started taking care of me in small ways, fixing the leaking faucet, sweeping the porch, learning to cook the stew I loved. It wasn't much, but it was real. One afternoon, he said, "Mom, I've been volunteering at the community center, helping seniors with their finances so no one else gets tricked the way I tricked you. I think I finally found what I'm supposed to do." I laughed softly. "Sounds like redemption to me." He smiled. "Maybe. Or maybe it's just me learning what you've known all along, that the only wealth that matters is what you give." That night I wrote in my notebook, "He's learning to love without needing to take." Maybe that's all I ever wanted. As winter crept in, my body began to fade faster. The days blurred, the pain came in waves, but I wasn't afraid. I had made peace with my story and with my son. One night I woke up to find Daniel sitting by my bedside, holding my hand. His eyes were red, his face drawn. "You're not leaving me, Mom. Not yet." I smiled weakly. "I already left the anger, Daniel. The rest is just time catching up." He pressed his forehead against my hand. "I wish I could take it back, every selfish thing I did. Then promise me something instead. Anything. When I'm gone,
Don't live in punishment. Live in purpose. Use the guilt to build something kind. He nodded, tears falling onto my blanket. I will. I swear I will. And I believed him. In the following days, I wrote my last entry in the red notebook. It wasn't long, but it was everything I needed to say. If love is a circle, then even betrayal is part of it. We hurt the ones closest to us because they're the only ones close enough to reach our hearts. But forgiveness isn't letting go of justice. It's making peace with the truth. I forgive him, not because he deserves it, but because I do. The next morning, the house was filled with sunlight. I remember opening my eyes and seeing Daniel asleep in the chair beside me, his head resting near my hand. I smiled faintly, and for the first time in decades, I felt free. When I closed my eyes again, I didn't feel fear or sadness, only warmth. A week later, at my small memorial, Daniel read from the red notebook. His voice trembled, but it carried through the quiet crowd. My mother once told me that silence was her sharpest weapon, but I know now it was also her greatest love. She never shouted, never cursed, never demanded. She taught through stillness, and in her stillness, I found who I was meant to be. He closed the notebook gently, placed it on the table beside my framed photo, and whispered, "Thank you for teaching me that love, even when broken, can still be beautiful." As he walked out of the chapel, the sun broke through the clouds, lighting his face with a glow that looked almost like forgiveness. And maybe, somewhere beyond that light, I smiled, because in the end, my silence had done what words never could.
It's been 2 years since I buried my mother, but sometimes it still feels like she's sitting beside me, quiet, calm, sipping her tea and watching the world without needing to speak. I don't hear her voice in words anymore. I feel it in the spaces between things. The stillness after a long day, the hush of dawn before the city wakes, the scent of chamomile when I can't sleep. After her funeral, I stayed in her house for months. At first, I told myself it was to take care of her things, but the truth was, I couldn't let go. The rooms felt alive with her presence. Her shawl still hung over the chair by the window. Her handwriting still covered the refrigerator calendar. And the red notebook, the one that had carried her truth, sat on the kitchen table like a heartbeat that refused to stop. For a long time, I couldn't open it again. I was afraid of what I might find, or worse, what I might not. But one rainy afternoon, as thunder rolled far away, I finally gathered the courage. Inside were words I'd never seen before, pages she must have written in her final days. The ink was faint, her handwriting shaky, but her thoughts were as sharp as ever. If my son ever reads this, I want him to know forgiveness is not a gift for others. It's how you stop bleeding from wounds they can no longer see. He will carry guilt. That's natural. But guilt should never be a home, only a road. Let it lead him somewhere worth arriving. I closed the notebook and cried like a child, not from grief this time, but from a strange kind of gratitude. My mother had forgiven me long before I even knew how to ask. In the months that followed, I tried to rebuild my life. I took a job at the local community center, helping senior citizens manage their finances. The irony wasn't lost on me. The son who once stole from his mother, now protecting others from being taken advantage of. But every time I sat across from someone frightened by paperwork or confused by numbers, I saw her hands in mine. Steady, patient, teaching through silence. One afternoon, an elderly woman came to the center clutching a stack of forms and trembling. She said, I don't understand any of this. They said I need to sign, but I don't trust it. I looked through her papers and immediately recognized the scam. I calmly explained everything, helped her report it, and made sure her savings were safe. When she left, she hugged me tightly and whispered, "You must be someone's blessing." I smiled faintly. I had a good teacher. Every week, I started running workshops, financial literacy for seniors. It wasn't glamorous, but it mattered. People began showing up. Word spread, and soon, local newspapers started calling it the Margaret Project. I didn't name it that, of course. Someone else did. But when I saw her name printed on the flyers, I felt a lump in my throat. Her legacy was growing roots. Still, there were nights when guilt returned, crawling into the quiet corners of my mind. I'd sit on the porch, look at the stars, and whisper, "I hope I'm doing enough." And somehow, the wind would always move just then, soft and reassuring, like a hand on my shoulder. One evening, as I was locking up the center, a young man approached me. "Are you Mr. Cole?" "Yes. My grandmother said you helped her last year. She wanted me to thank you." He handed me a small envelope. Inside was a photo of an old woman smiling beside her family and a note that read, "Because of your help, I got to see my granddaughter graduate. You saved more than my money. You saved my peace." I stood there, under the flickering streetlight, tears blurring the picture. For the first time in years, I felt worthy of my mother's forgiveness. A few weeks later, I visited her grave. It was a crisp autumn morning. The cemetery was quiet except for the rustle of leaves. I brought a fresh bouquet of lavender, her favorite, and placed it beside her headstone. Her name was carved in elegant script, Margaret Cole, 1958 to 2023. Silence was her sharpest weapon, and her gentleness was her greatest strength. I knelt beside her grave and spoke softly, "Mom, I started a program in your name. People come to learn, to protect what they've built. You would have been proud." The breeze picked up, brushing against my face like her familiar touch. I smiled through the tears. "I'm doing what you asked. I'm not living in punishment anymore. I'm living in purpose." I stayed there for a while, watching sunlight break through the clouds, and I thought about all the ways she'd shaped me, not through grand gestures, but through her quiet resilience. She never needed to shout to teach me what mattered. Her lessons lived in what she didn't say. On my way back home, I stopped by the community bulletin board near the park. Someone had pinned a flyer there. Volunteer tutors needed, the Margaret Project. And beneath it, a note scribbled in pencil, "Thank you for helping people like me." I smiled. Her name, her spirit, her lesson, they were still alive, rippling outward like circles in water. That night, I opened her red notebook again. On one of the last blank pages, I wrote my own words. "Mom, you were right. Guilt was a road, and it led me back to you. Not in body, but in every act of kindness I can give. I hope when people say my name, they hear yours echoing behind it. You were the storm that broke me and the calm that rebuilt me. I love you always." Then I closed the notebook gently and placed it back on the table, where her candle once burned. As I turned off the light, I glanced at the chair by the window, her chair, and for just a moment, I could almost see her sitting there again. The scarf draped over her shoulders, her hands folded neatly in her lap, her eyes soft and knowing. And in that silent, invisible moment, I felt it. Peace. The kind she'd carried her whole life. The kind she left behind for me to find. I whispered into the stillness, "Thank you for everything, Mom. I finally understand." Outside, the wind moved through the trees, carrying with it the scent of lavender and rain. Somewhere far above, the clouds parted, and a single ray of moonlight fell through the window, resting on the red notebook, glowing softly like a final blessing. And just like that, her story didn't end with loss. It continued. Through me, through every life she quietly touched,
through the silence that now spoke louder than any voice ever could. Because Margaret Cole didn't just survive her pain, she transformed it. And in doing so, she taught me and everyone who knew her that love, even when scarred, still finds a way to shine.